Joe, Tony, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Oh,
Thanks for having us.
Very good. So guys, today we're going to talk about data. And more specifically, we're going to talk about how companies can leverage data to accelerate growth and increase margins. And whenever I talk about data, there's a phrase that comes to mind. And that is, data is the new oil. And I thought, since 2023 is the year of AI, and AI relies so much on data, I took the liberty of asking ChatGPT about that phrase, data is the new oil. And I would like to get your thoughts on its response as a starting point for our conversation today. So first, here is what ChatGPT said to my question. The phrase data is the new gold or the new oil has become increasingly popular in recent years as data has become more valuable and essential to businesses and organizations. The comparison to gold implies that, like gold, data has become a valuable commodity that can be bought, sold, and traded. However, data is even more valuable than gold as it can be used to influence future behaviors and decisions. Additionally, the comparison to gold suggests that data is a finite resource that can be mined, processed, and extracted. But we all know that data really is only growing with time. What are your thoughts on this response from our friend ChatGPT?
It's amazing. I think somebody must have had a lot of data to train ChatGPT on. I think I think when I think about oil, I think about horrible things in the world like plastics and pollution and all these sorts of things. I think the idea of data is like it's an asset like oil, but it to your friend ChatGPT, their comment like we're not going to run out. If anything, like it just gets bigger and bigger, and there's some fun statistics about like how much data we're generating every year surpasses all the data ever generated in all prior years, or those types of fun things. But yeah, I think it's a valuable entity or asset that you can use to do all sorts of good things in the world and profitable things as well. I think it did a pretty good job. It's great.
Great. And you touched a little bit on it. It seems to me, from my perspective, that data is more available than ever, but this does not necessarily mean that it's being leveraged to its fullest extent. Do you agree with that? Do you see a little bit of that in your line of business?
I think we've only begun to think about what data can do. Frankly, I think the companies that are really using data are typically the really humongous companies in the world. And your comment about ChatGPT, it takes a huge supercomputer that most companies will never have the ability to go access to train that GPT model. I think most companies are very early in their journey of trying to understand what data they have, what data they could have. Maybe where I think the analogy with oil is a pretty good one is you have to refine the oil and make it into something useful. So how to do the data refinement and cleaning to make it usable. Joe, what would you add to
that? Yeah, for sure. I think, because the amount of data is always growing, it's a constant job to go and figure out how that data integrates into your business, how it becomes valuable for your business, if it's just noise or if it's something that deserves some attention and integration into your decision-making process for your business or maybe for your customers.
Very good. And both of you have a lot of experience in the data science world. And specifically on helping companies unlock value from their data, right? So what can you tell us about what you do and how you help companies unlock that value, and maybe some examples of how companies might unlock that value?
Yeah, I'll start and then Joe jump in. Yeah, I think typically, Matteo, we would start with some kind of an assessment to help a company understand what their data landscape is, what kind of data they have stored in their own company. Maybe it's in some data lake, maybe it's in thousands of spreadsheets in some shared folder somewhere. It could be any of these things, and then based on what we discover working with them in that sort of assessment process, we'll put together some kind of a plan. And that plan might be something like, let's build a data lake with you using a cloud software, a cloud environment, or it might be, let's go try to build a predictive model and see if the kind of size of data and the quality and cleanliness of the data is good enough to build a model. And in not every case is that possible. I think that's typically the beginning of those cases. And I think Joe can give a couple really nice example use cases of kind of where that sort of thing goes from there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, through the history of what we've been doing with data, and a lot of I would say a lot of it is kind of naturally coming from more of a finance and a dollars perspective of how do I use all this data around pricing and availability and the market conditions to determine what should be the margin on this product or what should be the price and those kinds of things. So once you have all that data together, you can build things like pricing engines or lead scoring mechanisms for potential customers, or maybe some kind of decision making tool to help with maybe even what kind of real estate to buy or where to buy it sort of scenario.
Does the industry matter, or do you guys work with companies coming from any industry and then you figure out kind of what matters most to them?
Industry doesn't matter, with one exception, Matteo. We don't like to work with companies that are doing something bad in the world, or something that I like to say, does it pass the can I talk to my mom about a test? And so I think within that, there are certainly some industries that we've spent the most time in and have the most familiarity with. And we know some good questions to ask. But I would also say, like, one of the really interesting things with data is often having people from kind of outside of your industry ask questions can be really informative, because maybe somebody's been thinking about the particular use case or their own industry for 20 years the same way, and sometimes it's that spark of interesting question from somebody that maybe it's a dumb question, but maybe it's the question that unlocks a whole lot of more profit or market growth or whatever. And frankly, as consultants, it's really fun to get to learn new industries and ask those kind of questions, and see people's wheels turn in their heads sometimes when you ask these kind of questions.
I love it. And so you're helping. The first thing you do is you do an assessment and you help an organization understand what data they have, right? You look at the lay of the land and you go like, okay, let's see what you really have. And you start asking questions from there.
Yeah.
How does the team look like, right? I mean, you start doing this, and maybe what is a team of 3 people, data scientist, business analyst. What type of people do you put into these projects so that they also can ask the right questions?
Yeah, really just, at that sort of assessment phase, it's people who can do an analysis or analyst at that point, it's too early for a data scientist. It's too early for any software. It's really asking a question. So the example might be something like, how do you sell your product? How do you know if you lost the sale or not? And if the answer is something like, we only know when we win the sale, then building something that's going to help them grow their sales might be difficult, because you don't capture the loss. So then it's, the output of the assessment is, hey, we probably can't build you a propensity to buy model. However, we would recommend you work with your CRM, solution, or your selling solution, to record better how you're losing, as an example of the assessment. Or it could be, a more advanced use case where the customer or potential customer already has a big data lake, and they want to know some question like, hey, are there datas that you can buy or that are open source data that we can add to this data? The example I would give you on that is, hey, we have we have a big database of sales by store, and we have thousands of stores around the world. We want to know which stores are most successful. Well, we might do something like bring OpenStreetMap data or another geo data set in to say, well, maybe the most successful stores are the ones that are closest to another type of store. And, that helps them think about maybe the next time they open a new store to put it next to, fast food or, whatever it might be. So there's all these kind of things. It's, part of those assessments, Matteo, is like, it's not a scripted one size fits all. It's very much every question you ask leads to 2 or 3 other questions, and eventually you build this idea of like, hey, we think the first project you might want to think about is X, and we're going to go do a proof of concept, which is usually the next thing, that says, hey, we think like we're going to go test and make sure that there's enough signal or enough quality data to go build a model. I think that's the way I would think about it. So yeah, it's usually just 1 or 2 people who are very inquisitive, people asking a bunch of questions and helping to build out an idea of what that might look like.
Does size matter in terms of size of the company, or it's all really about the size of the problem you're tackling or the company is tackling?
Yeah, the size of an organization typically doesn't matter. What matters is the type of data that they've collected, and maybe for how long. Like, imagine there's a brand new company, it's never done anything. It probably doesn't have a whole lot of data. It doesn't mean you can't go find data or buy data or add data from other sources. But if I go back to that selling example, if you've had no history of sales, or if you've had 10 years of really high quality history of what you've sold, those are 2 very different starting points in terms of how you might leverage data in that case, as an example.
Got it. What happens when a company doesn't really have defined metrics? They don't have KPIs, OKRs. They're just, going with the wind, and they want to leverage data. Do you start defining those KPIs and OKRs with them? How do you approach such a situation?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, not knowing what you're going after is a big problem. So putting those stakes in the ground of, these are the KPIs that really define our business is a conversation, and it's a discussion and an agreement with the business about, what should they be, how do we want to measure those, how often do we want to measure those, and what data do we need to get there? So for sure, that's a key part of those initial discussions and for the assessment.
Matteo, I would just add, like, I think maybe more often what we encounter is companies that have too many KPIs and OKRs and these sort of things. So imagine, there's thousands of metrics or hundreds of metrics, and you try to understand what the levers are that you can help a company with to grow or to be more profitable or whatever they're looking to achieve. And it's impossible to get aligned as an organization, or it makes it really difficult to say, we're going to go focus on this one thing, and that's the key to growth, because nobody is accountable. It's the hundreds of metrics. Imagine driving a car with hundreds of gauges. Like, you don't need this. You need to focus on the one thing that really matters, or the three things, some small number of metrics, and then just go drive those things. And that's that. Like, I think probably the company that doesn't have any metrics is not calling us for data science work. They might need a strategy help. The companies more often come with like this whole bucket of tons of metrics, and we help them really kind of focus on what actually matters for their particular business.
I remember my corporate life and the discussions we will have about what KPIs matter most. And different business units may have different opinions of what matter most, right? Do you find those situations, and do you get into companies that maybe have infighting between business units of what matters most, and how do you go about that? Do you need a special type of champion within the company that will help you kind of decide between different opinions and just move forward?
Yeah, typically what we're looking for in these assessments is a combination of ability to go understand and analyze data, maybe build a model on top of the data, but also the ability to enact change. And so there's one version of this whole story that is some very smart person makes a PDF document that says you should do something. And there's another version of this whole story that says we have the model output connected to some purchasing system, or directly moving a prospective customer to the top of the lead list, or something like this, where actual change can happen. And I think when we think about those identifying the right place to start, it's typically like within some division there's a good amount of data, there's an ability to build some sort of analysis, whether it's ML or not, as well as like this lever where we can actually instrument a change and something happens, where we can generate a benefit to the business. And actually it's also important to be able to measure that it was this algorithm or a formula, whatever it is, that's actually generating the benefit. And that's kind of the where it stops being an experiment and starts changing the way the business works. And that requires a bit of an open mind, that this is not some science experiment on the side. It needs to be something that can actually drive a change.
What project makes you most proud? Are there things that you've done with clients that you're super proud of that you can tell us here? I imagine there are sometimes confidentiality agreements and stuff you cannot mention, right? But is there anything that makes you proud because of the type of project, the impact, the complexity that you can share with us?
I'll start, and Joe, please jump in. But I think in some way every project makes me proud. I think it's fun to be in a position where you get to do these types of things and work on really hard problems. But the ones that I really frankly enjoy the most are the ones that are either cases where the customer didn't really understand that they had a problem. So there's a version of an engagement that is they have a problem, they just need a solution. But there's this other one that is we can reach out to a company, because we use data ourselves too, and find ways that we can help them where that maybe they didn't even understand that there was an opportunity. Those I get excited about. And I think, yeah, and I would, Joe, please jump in. We do lots of other exciting things that make people proud too. But
yeah, for sure. The examples where you're affecting change in the world for the better is pretty amazing. I think also projects that involve sort of outside the box thinking. So for example, we have a project where we're trying to prevent poaching of endangered species, and one outside of the box thought was, hey, who can identify dead animals? Oh, guess what? A group of vultures can. And if a group of vultures is circling over a particular landscape, you can probably guess that there is a dead animal there. And it needs to go be inspected and recorded and understood what happened in scenarios where you're trying to protect endangered species. So it's sort of that outside the box thinking that I really enjoy, and that I know a lot of people really enjoy around solving that problem and understanding all of the things that are available at your fingertips to go and look for clues and help to bring a solution to life.
Very nice. I like the outside of the box thinking. There's creativity there as well. And that brings me to this question. It seems talent is very important for you. It seems that the people that you assign to a project are key to the success of that project, right? How do you go about finding the right talent? Is there anything special you do during interviews to see if people have that type of outside the box thinking?
Matteo, I think when we met you, I don't know how long ago this was now, maybe over a year.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a feeling of how well can we have a conversation between what we're thinking and how well can we communicate ideas and thoughts. And I think your comment actually the first time we met was, you sound like someone that I would really like to go have a beer with. And it's some of that attitude of, do I get along with this person? Do I see myself as a great teammate along with this person? Is this somebody that I could go on a 3-day hike with and not want to throw them off the cliff or something like that? Like, is this someone that I could see partnering with and becoming a good teammate? And I think it's sort of a gut feeling. We don't always get it right, obviously. No one does, but when you've been on successful teams in the past, you go back to those relationships and the ability to just have a fun and intelligent conversation because we're doing this all day, every day. It needs to be fun. It needs to be applicable, and yeah.
I love it. Do you look for similar things in clients?
Not necessarily. I mean, it always depends on the customers. I would say between every business partnership, and no matter if that's sort of a vendor-client relationship or true partnership, you have to understand each other. You have to do more than the status report kind of things. You have to really understand their business, and in order to do that, you have to have a relationship with the people. And the stronger we build those relationships, the more we trust each other and can make out of the box recommendations
Right.
that may spur other business or solve other problems for them.
Nice. Let's go back to the data itself. What makes data usable or not usable for this type of work, right? You go in, you look at the data, you do your assessment. Like you said, there might be Excel spreadsheets, there might be a data lake, there might be whatever, right? What makes it easier for you guys to start building recommendations and engines for recommendations.
But yeah, what makes it easiest or easier would be if there's lots of it, if it's really well structured, and if there's a clear outcome variable or column, however you want to think of it, in the data. So the first one is like, generally speaking, the more data you have, the better. And the ratio between the number of rows and number of columns should be at least like 10x the number of rows than columns, something like this. If any data science people are listening, they're going to give you a bunch of comments that I don't know what I'm talking about on that statement. The second one is like, is it well structured? So like, you know, is there a field that says quantity, and sometimes it's TWO, and sometimes it's the number 2, and sometimes it's I don't know. You know, it should always be something pretty structured. And then, you know, finally, like, is there a target? Like, we won the quote, or you know, the animal survived, or, you know, something like this that helps us, you know, understand what the outcome is, what is the output. And by the way, like, this never happens. There's always some like cleaning, pre-processing, you know, back to the oil comment, you always have to do that, but that's generally the easiest thing. And then, you know, the how old is the data? Like, if you know, like an example might be, how often do elevator doors fail in the world? How often do they fail? Probably not very often. But if the only way you know about it is because some maintenance log from, you know, somebody updates every month at the end of the month, probably it's going to be really hard to go do a preventative maintenance if you don't have all the right data and it's really old, you know, those types of things. So having fresh data, having a data that's automatically updated that people don't touch, with, you know, the good quality, all those kind of things, that helps a lot. Ideally, it's in some relational database. Ideally, it doesn't have to be. Ideally, there's, you know, some easy way to get access to it, some API or some, you know, something like this. And, you know, one of the things we specifically can call out is, like, if there's already some business intelligence tool like a Tableau or a Power BI, some dashboard on top of the data, it means people are looking at it and they probably have gone through some of the work of cleaning it up and preparing it because they're showing it on a dashboard. That's usually a pretty good indication that, you know, like at least some of the foundational work has already happened.
Very good. If a company wants to get started with this and getting the right insights to improve their business, how do they go about that? How can they do it?
Yeah, I would say one answer is they could call us. That would be a great answer. But you know,
where can
frankly,
they do
I think,
that, Tony? Where,
yeah,
if they want to call you,
yeah,
where can they do that?
they can go to nimblegravity.com. It's spelled exactly how you think it would be spelled. You know, in all seriousness, like, I think that there's probably someone in the organization who has a really complicated spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet is doing a lot of the sort of analysis and cleaning up and all this sort of stuff. That person has figured out how to export things out of 3 different systems and combine it together in some way. Go find that person, ask them how they did it, and then connect that person to us, or, you know, ask that person to, you know, work with some other kind of, you know, computer programmer or developer to go automate that spreadsheet so they don't have to manually combine the things together. And that starts that journey, I think, in more cases than not.
What kind of skills will a company need to hire or contract to leverage their data? Let's say they need to go find someone.
Yeah, really, it probably really depends. Yeah, and that can be part of the assessment that we deliver also. But yeah, I mean, it really depends on what they're trying to get out of the data. You know, whether they have more third-party data, or whether they have more of their own data. Also, probably depends on their technical environment and some cloud infrastructure. Do they have that already set up, or do they need some help there? So it could be a range of data engineers, business intelligence people. It could even be some systems design, solution architect type people, depending on how big or small the problem might be. And so yeah, really depends.
Okay. When you're working on a project, is there an aha moment? Is there a place where you go like, Eureka, we found it, right? We found the golden thing that we were looking for in this project, and now we can give insight to this company that is going to really change how they do business. And how excited do you get if that happens?
I would say it almost always happens, but it's almost always something right next to the question that the customer originally asked, not the thing they asked. And typically we like to ask customers for their hypotheses, so they'll have like, hey, when Bob is the salesperson, he always brings the biggest deals. Or they'll have the urban legend of how these things work, and we'll start the exploration there. But one of the really fun things about data is sometimes you'll find this thing right next to the question that the customer originally asked that actually turns out to be super valuable and interesting. And of course we answer the question they asked, but like, hey, being able to go to a customer and say, hey, we found this thing in the data and it's really weird, and we think it's super interesting. That to me is a fun aha moment, where you're able to kind of reveal things about their own company that maybe they've been at for 20 years or something, where they didn't know, or no one in a whole industry knew about this thing, and we were able to go kind of discover it through that. That's a aha moment. Of course, there's also this aha moment when you can build a really highly predictive model, and it's just, it's giving some fun thing. But I get pretty jazzed up about the sort of stories that data can tell, that aren't expected, or where the data is going to lead you wherever it leads you, kind of thing.
One thing so I did a course back in the day, Six Sigma Green Belt, right? And I remember being like, okay, so there's correlation and there's causality. And that conversation, we brought up that conversation many times in the company, because there was a lot of people talk a lot about correlation, right? And they go like, oh, see these 2 points of data, something is happening because of this. And correlation doesn't always mean causality. Do you find yourselves having that conversation often, and educating or differentiating between the two?
Every day. And we also like to talk about ways to avoid those problems, which is specifically things along the lines of experimentation. So back in school, we all learned the scientific process where you have a test and a control. And that's where you would, in business, you can do this as well. You can have the new way of buying or selling or calculating something, and you can have the old way, and you can run them side by side for some period of time, and you can say, this is actually what's happening because we changed only one thing, and we can compare it to the control. So I would say we have these all the time. The other thing in data that is a frequent conversation, in addition to the chicken egg or the cart horse kind of question, is bias. So the conversation is there some underlying bias in the data about hey, we only won this business because of some factor that is it skewed some way or the other? Like if we lost the deal but we didn't try very hard, we didn't write it down as a loss. Well, that's a bias. That means all your data is focused on the deals we really tried hard. Like if you're not putting every deal into your CRM and you're trying to build a predictive model, that's probably a problem. Like there, you know, so I think those are the things that I would say, yeah. But when a whole lot more traffic comes to our website after this podcast, I would say the cause and effect is clear.
Causality all the way.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes to mind is we business people tend to think about solutions and tend to be executive, and executive means you implement solutions and you go do things, right? And one of the things I learned is sometimes we spend too little time defining the problem and too much time just running like crazy implementing solutions, maybe for a problem that was ill-defined or didn't exist to begin with. When you are starting a project, how important is it for your project to be successful to really define that first problem or objective that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, it's a great question. I kind of have two answers for it. One is it's incredibly important to have at least a starting point. And that means like you've defined what you're trying to do pretty well. As I said a moment ago, you need to have a little bit of an open mind, I think, to consider other things, you know, that might come up as you look at it. The other answer is, you know, I think like and maybe this is part of the open mind, is sometimes we see cases where companies are looking for proof that something they believe is true.
Wow.
And you know, the openness of everyone involved to sort of accept if that thing is not true, or you know, it's sometimes possible to have like 4 different graphs, and those 4 different graphs, 3 of them confirm the thing that they wanted to be true and 1 doesn't. And sometimes, you know, we all have this thing where it's okay, we have these 3 that explain it and back it up, and we just talk about those 3. So I think that's there. And you know, I think the other thing I would say is, like, if you don't take time to really understand what's happening and think about the outcome, and you just go execute, you could create some problems. Like, you know, a scenario where, you know, you just made some, like the back to our friend with the manual Excel spreadsheet. Like, if you get that automation wrong, you just made bad things happen way faster. Like there was no benefit in that. So, you know, I think that's how I would suggest thinking about it.
Very good. An open mind to defining the problem, an open mind to defining the solutions, and really trusting the data and what the data is showing us, despite our bias.
Or being open to question the data. Like, it could be that you've stored it wrong this whole time. Like, you know, I think it's generally a questioning mind, and being, you know, sort of internally cynical about what you're seeing, and ask yourself, why is it this way? You know, I think something like that. And maybe, you know, maybe it's also getting data from more than one place and making sure it says the same thing. Like, that could be really impactful too. It's like, can we actually trust this data, or is it has some problem in it?
Good. Different, related but different topic. Do you find sort of data synergies, like ecosystems between companies? Maybe, I don't know, a retail and a, you know, consumer packaged goods company, some synergies where if they joined forces and joined data, both of them could be finding benefit. Do you find those situations, and even make recommendations to companies like, hey, if you really had a, you know, a partnership here, you could find something very powerful?
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting thing. I think there's an aspect of companies not wanting to share data very openly because it's like they view it as their own internal private data, and in most cases that's probably exactly the right thing to think about. Is, hey, there's no benefit in me sharing this data with someone else. This is data I should keep to myself because it'll hurt my business if I share it. And that's the de facto, that's the way people think. But there are cases where sharing data that you accidentally generate as part of doing business with some other company and they could benefit a whole lot from it. This is commonly referred to as data exhaust, is kind of the way to think about it. That could be, a really interesting concept. Sometimes you can make some extra money off of selling this data to other people. I think there's also cases like where we see it mostly is when it's something to do with the world being a better place to live, or climate, or these things where no one has everyone's trying to save a species, or control climate, or do something. There's a lot of data sharing in those places because everybody's on the same mission, and it's not as much about kind of keeping somebody else out. And I think there's other cases where data sharing could be explored, and it's certainly a conversation that we've had more and more frequently of let's find other companies that could share this data, or companies that would be willing to sell data. Definitely an interesting topic.
Good. What technology trends are you looking at closely when you think about the future of data science? Where is your mind at? What gets you excited? What gets you scared? What's coming?
Wow. Joe and I were in a conversation a few days ago where someone that's not really part of the data science community said this GPT thing feels like it's going to be more impactful than the iPhone. And honestly, I totally agree with this. We are just starting to understand just how impactful this would be. And by the way, just for awareness, like, I'm the guy that said blockchain isn't super interesting, NFT is not super interesting. So I'm not somebody that says this about new technologies that come up every day. But this one I think is really different. And I think we're just starting to see what a huge supercomputer and some really smart people at OpenAI can come up with. I jokingly say half my job is telling people they don't need GPT, and the other half is figuring out how they do need GPT. And I think in 3 years ago we built a kind of prototype on top of GPT-2, and it didn't work very well for some sort of marketing kind of capability. And I really kicked myself, Matteo, that we didn't keep building on this and improving it, because here we are, and the world changed overnight. So I think on one side, the natural language generation, natural language processing, some of the sort of multimodal capabilities out there, I think are going to be huge. I would also just say, like, there are some fantastic things in the world like Python that are the universal access to capabilities like that, and those are pretty constant and like well supported, mostly open source. So I would say, like, there's a part of it that didn't get disrupted, that is the core, things like pandas and these types of tools that are all sort of inside of that Python ecosystem, or R for some folks. That part of it didn't change. And then the cloud also is a big factor. We don't I'm old enough that I had to buy a T1 line at some point and set up a router and plug a server into a rack and all this sort of stuff. And like, you spent $20,000 before you had any code written at all. And now, you know, for very little money, you could go do all that stuff and get access to all those huge capabilities really quickly, which I think, you know, this is not a new thing, but that's the other big thing that, you know, from a technology perspective, moved the ball a lot. Yeah, and Joe's maybe closer to some of the tech stuff, but what else would you add, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that for sure, but the you know, the tools that are now maturing in the data science community are quite impressive. You know, being able to you know, process and analyze terabytes of data in very short periods of time is continuing to be really impressive. And you know, certainly the engineers out there that get a chance to load the system up and see, you know, see what it could do with a full tank of gas is really fun to talk about and learn.
We live in very interesting times. Is there anything I should be asking that I'm not asking?
Yeah, maybe the, you know, the what happens if you don't look at your data, or, you know, maybe that would be one way to think about it. Because, you know, I think data becomes a competitive advantage in a lot of different kinds of businesses. And, you know, if I think about like a certain type of product or service, if you have a way to make that service better because you have more data, cleaner data, whatever it might be, and then because you've made your service better, you get more customers or users, which means you get more data, which means your service gets better, which means you get more users, which means you get more data, which means your service. So there are ways that if you can become a data moat between you and your competitors, that I think becomes really hard to overcome in the future. And, you know, I think that's one super interesting thing, that if you don't do this, it may be that, you know, you could be disrupted. And by this, I mean, go down a data journey. So I think that would, I asked the question and then I answered it, Matteo.
That's what I needed. Thank you.
Yeah, Joe, what would you add? There's
a question that you didn't ask. I don't know. I think you covered a lot, Matteo. I think it was good.
Joe, Tony, I appreciate it. This was wonderful. I always enjoy talking to you guys very much. I look forward to seeing you in Denver, and thank you for being on the show again.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. It was great, Matteo. Thank you.
Matteo.